The private room at the Lantern Cove glowed with warm yellow light, the air thick with the scent of vanilla birthday cake. It was supposed to be a family party. My boyfriend, Pike, an ex-Navy SEAL, leaned close and whispered, "This isn't a birthday. It's a setup." I glanced across the room. My aunt had invited everyone, but in the corner sat my company's HR lawyer and a notary public. I smiled. It was a trap, just not their trap. My name is Sloane Mercer. At 32, I am the Director of Product at Bluebridge Analytics, a title that sounds more impressive than it feels. For the past 18 months, my life has been a blur of late nights, caffeine-fueled code reviews, and the singular obsessive focus of bringing a project to life. That project, an anti-fraud detection module called Signal Trace, was more than just a product. It was a complex, elegant answer to a question no one else was asking. Last week, I finalized the prototype. Tonight, apparently, I was having a birthday party. The celebration was my Aunt Karen's idea. She had booked the private mariner's room at the Lantern Cove, a restaurant known for its discreet service and views of the mist-shrouded bay. The room was beautiful. I had to admit, it was paneled in dark reclaimed wood that smelled faintly of salt and beeswax, and the tables were set with heavy linen and silverware that gleamed under the soft amber glow of nautical-themed lamps. The air was warm, thick with the scent of vanilla buttercream from a 3-tiered cake and the expensive perfume of my relatives. It was all overwhelmingly nice, and that was the first red flag. My family, the Mercers, were not heavy linen and 3-tiered cake people. Our traditions ran more toward sheet cakes from the grocery store and gatherings in someone's slightly cluttered backyard. This level of orchestrated elegance was reserved for weddings and perhaps funerals, not a 32nd birthday. I felt a light pressure on my wrist, a familiar grounding touch. Calder's fingers were warm against my skin, but his voice, a low murmur meant only for me, sent a chill racing up my spine that had nothing to do with the sea breeze outside. Ceiling-mounted camera, 4 o'clock, right above the main doorway, he said, his eyes not moving from a polite, neutral scan of the room. 2 rear exits, both are blocked by those oversized ficus planters. They are heavy, deliberate. My own eyes flickered upward. He was right. Tucked into the recess of a ceiling beam was a small black dome. Its lens was an unblinking eye aimed directly at the center of the room where I stood. I followed his gaze to the back. 2 doors, likely leading to the kitchen or an emergency corridor, were effectively barricaded by enormous ceramic pots, each holding a tree that looked far too lush to be real. My stomach tightened. Calder had spent a decade as a Navy SEAL. He saw the world in terms of threat vectors, entry points, and tactical disadvantages. He didn't get paranoid. He got observant, and his observations were rarely wrong. My gaze drifted to the gift table near the entrance, a mahogany console table draped in a white cloth. Among the brightly wrapped boxes and gift bags, 2 items seemed glaringly out of place. Calder gave a subtle nod in their direction. "See that," he murmured. A handsome leather file box, the kind used for important documents, sat open. Its label, in my aunt's looping script, read, "For Sloane." Next to it was a sleek, portable document printer. Its power light, a single green dot in the dim room. You don't bring a file box and a printer to a birthday party. You bring them to a business transaction. They were props, staged for a performance I hadn't known I was cast in. Across the room, my cousin Tate was talking to our great-uncle, but his attention wasn't on the conversation. He was young, ambitious, and perpetually plugged in. I watched as he angled his body away, his head slightly tilted. A tiny flesh-colored earpiece was nestled in his right ear, almost invisible. He muttered something under his breath, a quick, furtive response to a voice only he could hear. When he turned back, his eyes met mine for a fleeting second before darting away. A flicker of guilt, so obvious it was like a confession. He couldn't even look at me. The pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a picture I didn't want to see. My breath caught when I saw who was sitting in the quietest, most shadowed corner of the room. Nora Vale, the head of human resources at Bluebridge Analytics, was nursing a glass of water. Her presence here was a stunning breach of professional boundaries. She was the architect of corporate policy, the calm, smiling face of compliance and termination. She had no place at a Mercer family gathering. Beside her sat a portly man in a nondescript suit. He was fidgeting with a briefcase on his lap, and pinned to his lapel was a small, official-looking badge. Even from across the room, I could read the embossed gold letters, Notary Public. A notary. They had brought a notary. The word echoed in my mind, cold and hard and legal. You only need a notary when you need a signature to be legally binding. Witnessed and irrevocable. My blood ran cold. This wasn't a party. It was an ambush dressed in fine dining. My eyes found the cake again, the centerpiece of the elaborate deception. It was a beautiful creation, adorned with delicate sugar flowers and intricate piping. But as I looked closer, the carefully scripted icing on top came into focus. It didn't say, "Happy 32nd birthday, Sloane." It didn't say happy birthday at all in elegant, looping cursive. It read, "New beginnings, Sloane." It wasn't a wish. It was a declaration, an announcement of a future they had planned for me. One that was beginning tonight, whether I consented to it or not. The final piece of the puzzle was the table at the far end of the room, tucked away near the service entrance. 3 men in dark, conservative suits sat there, speaking in low tones. They weren't family friends or plus ones. I'd never seen them before. They had the hard, impassive look of corporate lawyers or senior executives who were paid to observe and report. They weren't engaging with anyone, not even the waitstaff. Their entire focus was on me. Their gazes were heavy, analytical, like investors scrutinizing an asset about to be liquidated. They weren't looking at the family laughing and chatting around me. They were looking through them, as if my relatives were just part of the scenery, hired extras in this elaborate production. It all coalesced in a nauseating wave of clarity. The fancy room, the surveillance camera, the blocked exits, the office equipment on the gift table, my shifty cousin on a comm line, my HR director in the corner with a notary public, the chilling message on the cake, the anonymous corporate observers. This was a coordinated, meticulously planned event designed for one purpose. They had built this stage, surrounded me with the emotional leverage of my own family, and created a pressure cooker of social obligation and professional intimidation. They were going to make me sign something. Something they knew I would never agree to sign in the sterile, recorded environment of a Bluebridge conference room. They needed to do it here. They needed to do it tonight. And they thought the warmth of family, the glow of birthday candles, and the shock of it all would be enough to make me break. My Aunt Karen glided toward me, her face a carefully constructed mask of celebratory joy. She squeezed my arm, her rings digging slightly into my skin. "Sloane, darling, isn't this just wonderful?" she crooned. "We are all so proud of you." Her pride, like her parties, was a performance. For Karen, every family gathering was a stage, an opportunity to project an image of effortless success and unshakable unity to an imaginary audience. I remembered my high school graduation party, where she'd spent an hour arranging the caterer's platters to be perfectly symmetrical for photos, while my actual diploma sat forgotten on a side table. She wasn't malicious. She was simply the consummate set dresser for the Mercer family play. And tonight's production was apparently a tragedy disguised as a feel-good drama. She saw the expensive room, the well-dressed relatives, the gourmet food, and she saw a triumph. I saw the props, the blocked exits, and the paid actors in the corner. My stepmother, Evelyn, was next. She placed a cool, dry hand on my shoulder, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "Happy celebration, dear," she murmured, her voice a soft, silken thread of concern. We were all just saying it's high time we focused on what's truly important. I knew exactly what she meant. For years, her mantra had been a gentle, insidious refrain: family first, career second, Sloane. A job is just a job, but family is forever. It was a sentiment that sounded noble at holiday dinners, but always felt like a leash. She'd never once defended me when a male relative dismissed my work on Signal Trace as that little computer thingy, or asked when I was going to settle down and do something real. Her support was a conditional, fair-weather thing, offered only when my ambitions didn't cast a shadow on her curated vision of domestic tranquility. Tonight, she was playing the role of the loving matriarch. Her presence was meant to be a comforting blanket, but I knew better. She was here to provide the emotional anchor for their trap. The memory of her phone call from 2 days ago surfaced, sharp and clear. "Wear something soft, Sloane," she had advised, a strangely specific instruction. "Nothing too corporate. You want to be approachable." And then the truly bizarre part. "And why don't you bring that folder with your project overview? The one you showed me. Your uncle has a friend in tech. It might be good to get some casual advice." At the time, it felt clumsy, nonsensical. Now, it was a piece of the script. Her attempt to get me to bring the bait to my own execution, to bring company papers to a birthday party for advice. My gaze found Tate again. He was now studiously examining a painting on the far wall, doing anything to avoid looking in my direction. He worked in business development at ArcLight Metrics, Bluebridge's chief competitor, and the company most likely to acquire us. For the past year, he had been the source of a steady drip of unsolicited offers, LinkedIn messages proposing a quick chat about synergy, awkward calls suggesting lunch to explore opportunities. Each attempt was more transparent than the last, framed in the flimsy guise of cousinly concern for my career. I'd always politely declined, attributing it to his overzealous ambition. I had underestimated him. He wasn't just a corporate ladder climber. He was a willing inside man. The trap hadn't been laid tonight. The groundwork had been set for weeks. It started with the calendar invites 3 times in the last 10 days. A meeting in my calendar had been mysteriously cancelled and replaced with a tentative, all-caps event. Grandma's birthday. Don't forget. The first time, I'd been confused. My maternal grandmother had passed away 7 years ago. The second and third times, a cold nod of suspicion began to form. It was a ham-fisted attempt to clear my schedule, to ensure I would be available tonight without raising direct questions. Then came the family group text thread initiated by Karen. It was a flurry of exclamation points and heart emojis, but I'd noticed the careful choice of words. It was always a special celebration for Sloane, or a night to honor Sloane's new beginnings. The word birthday was conspicuously absent. It was a celebration, not a birthday, because they were celebrating an event they intended to create tonight. I kept my smile in place, a polite, plastic thing I could feel straining at the corners of my mouth. I mingled. I accepted hollow compliments from relatives who didn't know the first thing about what I did. I allowed Evelyn to pat my arm and tell me I looked tired, that I'd been working too hard. I let them all play their parts, because I had seen the stage manager's notes. 3 weeks ago, late on a Thursday night, while reviewing a chain of internal approval emails for a vendor contract, I saw it. It was a minor procedural document, something most people would rubber stamp without a second glance, but at the bottom of the CC list, I saw an email forwarded from Nora Vale to our CFO, Lawrence Pike. The subject line was innocuous, Rec for Asset Realignment. But Nora had forgotten to delete the preceding message in the chain. It was a brief, single line from a legal consultant, Nora. Per our discussion, Attached is the standard template for voluntary IP asset transfer and non-compete. Please confirm receipt. Nora's name. Intellectual property asset transfer. The words had burned themselves into my memory. That was the moment suspicion had hardened into certainty. The clumsy calendar invites, Tate's persistent poaching attempts, Evelyn's strange advice, it had all snapped into focus. They weren't desperate, annoying events. They were coordinated moves in a larger campaign. So I kept quiet. I played along. I let them believe their trap was closing around an unsuspecting target. I let Karen fuss over the canapes and Evelyn preach her gospel of family over ambition. I saw them not as family, but as components of a machine. Karen was the venue, the atmosphere. Evelyn was the emotional leverage. Tate was the corporate Judas, the bridge to the enemy. They were the perfect cover, a human shield of plausible deniability. No one would suspect a corporate takedown at a family birthday party. It was brilliant, in a deeply cynical way. But my family, for all their utility, were not the architects. They were the wallpaper, the backdrop against which the real action was meant to unfold. The true directors of this play were sitting at that quiet table in the back. My eyes drifted back to them. One man was older, with the weary, calculating expression of a man who spends his days in boardrooms. I recognized him now from the company's annual report, Lawrence Pike, Chief Financial Officer of Bluebridge, the man Nora Vale had emailed about IP asset transfers. The others were likely his legal counsel, or perhaps M&A advisors from the acquiring company. They were the ones pulling the strings, and they had cast my family in supporting roles. They thought they had created the perfect family-friendly trap, cushioned with love and social pressure. They thought they knew me. They thought I would crumble. The smile on my face felt like a foreign object, a mask I had rented for the evening, while my uncle told a loud, rambling joke that half the table had already heard. My mind was a clean, cold-lit room, arranging facts on a whiteboard. This wasn't chaos. It was a corporate action executed with the clumsy precision of an HR department trying its hand at black ops. And like any well-defined problem, it could be broken down into its component parts. The primary driver, the engine of this entire charade, was money. Specifically, the 8-figure acquisition deal currently in its final stages between Bluebridge Analytics and our chief competitor, ArcLight Metrics. The asset in question was my project, Signal Trace. It wasn't just a feature. It was a new paradigm technology that made our existing platform exponentially more valuable. I knew from a trusted source in finance that the deal was contingent on a clean transfer of all intellectual property, and I, Sloan Mercer, was the single biggest encumbrance on that IP. My employment contract, negotiated before Signal Trace was even a concept, contained a standard but powerful key person clause. It stipulated that for 2 years following an acquisition, my role was integral to the ongoing development and success of any product I had principally authored. For ArcLight, this represented a risk. They didn't want to buy a revolutionary technology that was dependent on its creator, a creator who could, in theory, leave after 2 years or become a difficult, uncooperative employee. Key person dependency gives the acquired team leverage, and it spooks investors. Lawrence Pike, our CFO, knew this. ArcLight had undoubtedly used my presence as a bargaining chip to drive down the purchase price. So Lawrence needed me gone, but he couldn't fire me. A wrongful termination lawsuit would tie up the IP and litigation for months, potentially killing the deal. No, my departure had to be voluntary. It had to be my choice, signed and sealed. A voluntary resignation, especially one accompanied by an admission of fault, would effectively sever my connection to Signal Trace, sanitizing the asset for sale. The key person clause would be rendered moot. The strategy to achieve this was a classic corporate pincer movement. The first arm of the attack had been digital and subtle. About 3 weeks ago, I started encountering locked doors in the system. I went to pull a quarterly performance log from a protected server, a routine part of my job, and was met with a stark red text box, access denied. Please contact your system administrator. I assumed it was a glitch. When I tried to access the Alpha Build's deployment manifest the next day, the same thing happened. I didn't need an administrator to tell me what was going on. My permissions were being systematically stripped away, one by one, without notice. It was a silent digital excommunication. They were walling me off from my own creation, creating a situation where I could soon be accused of not being able to perform my duties. The second arm of the pincers was the document currently waiting in that leather box on the gift table, the one Nora Vale was guarding with the placid patience of a crocodile. I didn't need to see it to know its contents. It would be a 3-part package. First, a memorandum of understanding, a blandly named document that would contain a pre-written confession. It would be full of vague, but damaging admissions, mishandling of proprietary data, failure to adhere to communication protocols, unauthorized use of third-party software, all baseless, but impossible to disprove without the very server access they had just revoked. Second, a non-disclosure agreement of draconian scope, legally gagging me from ever discussing the circumstances of my departure, the acquisition, or the true nature of Signal Trace. Third, and most critically, a 24-month nationwide non-compete clause. This wouldn't just prevent me from working for a direct competitor. Its language would be broad enough to prevent me from working in the anti-fraud space entirely. It was designed to put me on ice, to remove me from the board as a player for 2 full years, long enough for Archite to integrate Signal Trace and claim it as their own. The timing was everything. This was Friday night. My source had confirmed the final vote by the Bluebridge Board of Directors to approve the Archite acquisition was scheduled for 9 a.m. Monday morning. They needed my signature tonight, notarized and filed, to present a clean, unencumbered asset to the board. A Friday night ambush gave me the entire weekend to feel helpless and isolated, with minimal chance of finding emergency legal counsel. It was ruthlessly efficient, and the venue was the masterstroke of cowardice. Staging this in a corporate boardroom would have felt official, adversarial. It would have created a clear record. But here, in the warm embrace of the Lantern Cove, surrounded by my family, it was a psychological masterclass. They were leveraging the primal human fear of public humiliation and familial disappointment. They were counting on my Aunt Karen's worried glances, on my stepmother's inevitable tearful appeal to do the right thing for the family. It was designed to short-circuit my professional instincts with personal emotion. It was a way to force a signature under duress without leaving any physical bruises, all while avoiding the press and potential whistleblowers who might be watching the company's headquarters. They thought I would panic. Lawrence Pike and Nora Vale looked at me and saw a product lead, a tech creative who was good with algorithms, but naive to the blood sport of corporate M&A. They saw a woman who, when cornered by her family and faced with career annihilation, would take the path of least resistance. She'll sign. They must have told each other, she'll sign to make the horrible, awkward scene go away. She'll sign to stop her aunt from crying. She'll sign because she won't see another choice. That was their plan. It was a good plan, thorough, multi-layered, and psychologically cruel. They had made only one mistake. They assumed they were the only ones with a plan. They didn't know that after I saw Nora Vale's forwarded email 3 weeks ago, I stopped being a product director and started being a strategist. They didn't know I had spent every night since then preparing for this exact moment. They thought they had built the perfect trap. They had no idea that I had already built my own, right into the foundations of their company. They didn't know about the mirror clauses. They thought they had built the perfect trap. What they didn't know is that you can't trap someone who has already seen the blueprints, studied the mechanics, and replaced the floorboards with a trapdoor of their own. Their mistake wasn't in their strategy, which was admittedly vicious. Their mistake was in underestimating me. They saw a coder. They should have seen an architect. My preparations didn't begin 3 weeks ago with Nora's email. That was merely the final confirmation. The flare in the dark that told me the enemy was moving. The real work started 3 months ago, during a tedious, but critical negotiation, for a new enterprise-level data analytics suite. It was a multi-year, 6-figure contract with a third-party vendor. The kind of document so dense with legal ease that even senior executives just skimmed the summary and signed. Buried deep within Appendix C, subsection 9A, under the heading Data Integrity Protocols, I inserted a single, custom-drafted paragraph. It was written by a boutique contract lawyer I'd paid handsomely out of my own pocket, a specialist in corporate defense. It looked innocuous, just another piece of boilerplate about compliance. We called it the mirror clause. The clause stated that any Bluebridge employee principally involved in the vendor's data integration, that was me, who was subjected to a non-standard exit protocol, a deliberately vague term outside of documented company procedure, would automatically trigger an immediate, fully independent, and binding forensic audit of all related project data and executive communications. The vendor software, which we were licensing, would be the instrument of that audit, conducted by an external firm named in the contract. In essence, the mirror clause stipulated that if Bluebridge tried to act against me in the shadows, I had their preemptive, legally binding permission to turn on every light in the building. It mirrored their bad faith with mandated transparency. Lawrence Pike, our CFO, had signed that vendor contract without a second glance. But a clause is just words on paper, without a mechanism to enforce it. The clause was the warhead. I still needed a guidance system and a trigger. The day after signing the vendor contract, I retained the services of Ward Gelder, a law firm known for its aggressive litigation department. I placed with them a letter of instruction, a digital dead man's switch. It was tied to a secure server that monitored a specific encrypted email address. My instructions were simple. If that address ever received an email from me containing the precise phrase, "Lantern goes dark," a prepackaged portfolio of documents was to be immediately dispatched to every member of the Bluebridge Board of Directors, the General Counsel, and the head of the Audit Committee. The system was automated. No human intervention required. No one could be persuaded to stop it. The phrase was a private irony, a little piece of poetry for the coming storm. Tonight, in a place called the Lantern Cove, they were trying to put my lights out. It seemed only fitting to use the name of their chosen gallows to spring my own. The portfolio waiting at Ward Gelder was the culmination of a year of quiet, diligent paranoia. I called it my shadow dossier. Working on a project as valuable as Signal Trace, I knew it could make me a target. So, I documented everything, every late-night breakthrough, every architectural decision, every line of critical code. The dossier contained printouts of my key code commits, time-stamped and digitally fingerprinted using a third-party hashing algorithm. It included a detailed log of every major project decision, cross-referenced with meeting minutes. Most importantly, it contained hard copies of every single approval email and resource allocation request signed off on by Lawrence Pike himself. The entire dossier was notarized and stored in a safe deposit box at a bank 2 towns away. They could wipe the company servers clean, but they couldn't touch my paper trail. I hadn't told Calder the specifics. He wasn't a lawyer or a corporate strategist. He was a man of action and observation, and his skills were of a different, more immediate nature. The night before, as I triple-checked my preparations, he'd simply watched me, his expression unreadable, but steady. He didn't ask about the contents of the files or the names of the lawyers. He just placed his hand over mine and said, "Tell me what you need me to see." If you stumble, I'll pull you out. It was all I needed to hear. He was my overwatch. The calm in the center of the storm, ensuring the physical space was as secure as my legal strategy. My own preparations for tonight were led. As I'd walked into the room, I'd paused at the gift table under the guise of admiring the cards. I placed my own pen next to the pile of presents. It was a high-end fountain pen, a gift from my father, but I had sent it to a specialty shop in Virginia 2 weeks ago. It was now equipped with a high-definition pinhole camera and a microphone. Its memory chip capable of recording for 4 hours. It was now aimed perfectly at the center of the room. A silent, impartial witness. Another layer was already in motion. At 6 p.m. this evening, a pre-scheduled text message was sent from a burner phone to a single recipient, a hungry, aggressive financial journalist I'd cultivated as a source over the past 6 months. The message was simple: Bluebridge Archite story is live. Await keyword. If you receive the keyword, your exclusive begins with a call to the Bluebridge General Counsel. Ask him about the mirror clause. The keyword was dark. The final piece was in my clutch. Feeling cool against my fingertips. It was a folded piece of paper, not an employment contract, but a certified copy of a patent filing, notarized last Tuesday. It was for a small, ancillary algorithm I had developed on my own time, on my own hardware, a year ago. It was related to Signal Trace's core logic, but legally distinct from it. Its purpose was to serve as a legal shield, a preemptive strike against the inevitable work-for-hire argument that everything I had ever conceived was the property of Bluebridge. This document proved I was an innovator in my own right, with my own registered intellectual property, complicating their narrative of a simple employee overstepping her bounds. All the pieces were in place: the legal framework, the evidence, the trigger, the witnesses, both digital and journalistic. All I needed was for them to make their move. I had built a better trap. And now my enemies were walking into it, bringing my complicit family with them as human shields. The bait was dry. The match was about to be struck. This party, this clumsy, transparent, cruel setup, wasn't their stage. It was mine. And they had brought everyone I wanted in the audience. The low hum of conversation in the room began to feel like a soundtrack set to a slow-motion execution. The performance had reached its third act on cue. Nora Vale detached herself from the shadows of her corner table. She moved with an unhurried, deliberate grace. Her smile, a fixed, pleasant thing that seemed entirely disconnected from the calculating look in her eyes. It was the same smile she wore when explaining changes to the company's 401k matching policy, and the same one she'd worn when announcing the last round of layoffs. It was a smile designed to anesthetize. She stopped beside me, placing a light, almost comradely hand on the back of my chair. "Sloane," she began, her voice a warm, reasonable alto. "I know this is an unusual setting, but we are all here because we care about you, the board, your family. Everyone wants to see you move forward without any unnecessary burdens." She gestured vaguely toward the gift table. "There are just a few standard exit formalities. We thought it would be more comfortable to handle them here among family rather than in a stuffy office. We just need a few signatures to release you from all this pressure." Release me. The word was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism. You release a captured animal. You release a valve to prevent an explosion. You release an asset from a liability. I was the liability. As if summoned by her words, the notary public rose and walked to the table with his briefcase. He opened it with 2 loud, definitive clicks that cut through the room's murmur. A sudden silence fell as he began to lay out the documents. He did it with the detached air of a mortician preparing instruments. 3 pristine, ominously thick stacks of paper. He aligned their edges with perfect, crisp precision. I didn't have to read the headers. I knew them by heart: the non-disclosure agreement, the memorandum of acknowledged policy violations, the voluntary separation and release of all claims agreement, my career's death warrant laid out in triplicate. The emotional pincer moved in. My stepmother, Evelyn, slid her chair closer, her hand coming to rest on my shoulder. Her touch was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a lead weight. "Sloane, honey," she whispered, her voice cracking with manufactured emotion. "Just sign the papers. It's for the best. We are all here for you. Your family is here to support you through this." Her words were poison wrapped in velvet. "We are the reason you must do this. Surrender, and we will still love you. I risked a glance toward the back table. Lawrence Pike, the CFO, the man whose signature was all over my project's funding approvals, caught my eye. He gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a gesture of encouragement. It was an order. "Proceed," he had implied. "Close the deal." I turned my gaze back to Nora, keeping my expression neutral. "And what happens if I don't sign?" Nora's smile didn't falter, but a coldness crept into her eyes. "Well, we would hope it wouldn't come to that," she said smoothly. "But if you were to refuse, we would have no choice but to note in your official file a profound lack of cooperation during a sensitive corporate transition. Such a notation would have significant consequences for your professional references. It would be a shame to see such a promising career end on such a sour note." It was a threat delivered with the pleasant inflection of a weather forecast. Beside me, I felt more than so-called a shift. He moved his chair back a few inches and then angled it forward, a subtle repositioning that placed his body partially in front of mine, creating a physical buffer between me and Nora. It was a quiet, territorial move. His eyes, for a split second, flickered up to the corner of the room where the small black dome of the security camera was mounted, and then to the pen on the gift table. His message was clear: "I see them. They don't see us. I am ready. I took a slow breath. "I'd like to read them first." A flicker of impatience crossed Nora's face, but she masked it quickly. "Of course," she said, though her tone suggested the request was a pointless formality. She reached over and tapped a manicured finger on a paragraph in the middle of the top page of the separation agreement. "This is the key section, just a standard clause confirming that all intellectual property developed during your tenure, specifically including all assets related to Project Signal Trace, remains the exclusive and undisputed property of Bluebridge Analytics." There it was, the heart of the matter, the reason for the cake, the fake party, the family hostages. They didn't just want me gone. They wanted my ghost exorcised from the machine. My name legally sandblasted off my own work. This was the moment. The precipice. Everyone in the room was holding their breath. My family, confused but sensing the tension. Nora and Lawrence, expectant, victory within their grasp. I reached for the pen on the table. Not one of the cheap ballpoints the notary had provided, but my own, the one I had placed there earlier, my camera. Its lens was aimed perfectly. I uncapped it with a soft click. The sound was unnaturally loud in the silent room. I saw the flash of triumph in Nora's eyes. I saw Evelyn's shoulders relax in relief. They thought it was over. They thought I was broken. I held the pen over the signature line, the nib hovering a millimeter above the paper. I looked up, letting my gaze sweep from Nora's smug face to Lawrence's impassive one, and then to my stepmother's look of relieved betrayal. I held the silence for 3 long, agonizing beats. Then I lowered the pen, but I didn't write. I looked directly at Nora Vale, and in a voice that was not loud, but was so clear and cold that it seemed to drop the temperature in the room by 10 degrees, I spoke the 2 words that would ignite the world. I enunciated each syllable with perfect, chilling clarity: "Lantern goes dark." For a moment, there was nothing. Just the 2 words hanging in the air, meaningless to everyone but me. Nora stared, a flicker of pity in her eyes, as if I'd finally cracked under the pressure and started speaking in tongues. Lawrence Pike shifted in his chair, a frown of annoyance forming. My stepmother's hand tightened on my shoulder, a gesture of patronizing concern. Then the first domino fell, a silent, sharp vibration against my leg. In my pocket, my phone came to life. I didn't need to look at it. I knew the message would be a simple, preformatted confirmation from the automated system at Ward Gelder, packet dispatched. Recipients, Bluebridge Board of Directors, General Counsel, Audit Committee Chair. Timestamp. The switch had been thrown. The signal had been received. The machinery I had built in the dark was now, at this very second, grinding into motion. The second domino fell less than 3 seconds later, and it was not silent. It was a loud, obnoxious, default corporate ringtone that erupted from the back table. Every head turned toward Lawrence Pike, as he fumbled for his phone. A look of pure irritation was on his face. He was about to silence it, to dismiss the interruption, but in his haste, his thumb swiped the screen instead of tapping it. The call connected. On speakerphone. A man's voice, crisp and professionally aggressive, filled the room. Mr. Pike, this is Mark Han from the Financial Sentinel. I have you on the record for a story we are running in the morning edition. Our sources confirm Bluebridge is leveraging extralegal tactics to secure IP assets ahead of the Archite acquisition. Can you provide any comment on the existence or activation of a mirror clause in your vendor contracts? The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop on the thick carpet. Lawrence's face, which had been a mask of board authority, collapsed into a canvas of pure, slack-jawed shock. He stared at the phone on the table, as if it were a venomous snake. A mirror? Nora breathed the words. Her voice was barely a whisper. All the warmth and condescending professionalism had evaporated, leaving behind a raw, naked confusion. Her eyes darted from Lawrence's horrified face to mine. She, the master of contracts and clauses, the architect of corporate policy, had no idea what the reporter was talking about, and that terrified her. While she was still processing, I made my move. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't make a scene. I simply reached into my clutch and retrieved the single folded document I had brought. I unfolded it with a quiet rustle of paper, and placed it on the table in front of her. On top of her meticulously prepared separation agreement, the title at the top was printed in bold, official font, right above the seal of the United States Patent and Trademark Office. Certificate of Registration for Auxiliary Predictive Algorithm. And at the bottom, the notary stamp and signature, dated last Tuesday. This is my personal registered intellectual property, I said, my voice calm and even. Developed on my own time, on my own hardware. It happens to be a foundational component for Signal Trace's next-gen capabilities. I thought it was important to keep the paperwork clean. Nora's eyes scanned the document, her face draining of all color. She looked as though she had just seen a ghost. A ghost with a notarized signature. I felt a feather-like light touch on the back of my chair. It was Calder. He didn't look at me, but his fingers pressed once, a firm, grounding signal, * stay put. Hold your ground. The next wave is coming. * He was right. The main door to the private room swung open with a soft whoosh of air. It wasn't a waiter. The man who entered was in his late 40s, dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that probably cost more than my first car. He radiated an aura of expensive, unflappable authority. He carried a slim leather briefcase, and his eyes swept the room once, taking in the scene with the cool appraisal of a shark entering a fish tank. He walked directly toward our table. He stopped beside Nora and placed his briefcase on the table next to the notary's documents. Nora Vale, Lawrence Pike, he asked, his voice polite, but edged with steel. My name is Julian Croft. I'm a partner with Ward Gelder. I'm here on behalf of our client, Sloane Mercer. He opened his briefcase and produced a document. He didn't hand it to them. He placed it firmly on the table. This is a litigation hold notice, effective immediately. You are legally required to preserve all documents, emails, server logs, text messages, and any other form of communication related to Project Signal Trace, the Archite Metrics acquisition, and the employment status of Ms. Mercer. Any deletion or alteration of records will be considered spoliation of evidence. Lawrence Pike finally found his voice. It came out as a strangled, indignant squeak. Who authorized this? You can't just, this is a private event. Julian Croft gave him a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. The mirror clause in your Q3 vendor contract with Correlitech Data Solutions authorized this, Mr. Pike. The one you signed in August. It triggered a binding independent audit. The moment my client uttered her activation phrase, my team is already interfacing with your IT department. And as for this being a private event, his gaze drifted to the Bluebridge branded file box and the corporate notary. It appears to be a corporate action conducted off-site using company resources. That makes it our business. The entire structure of their ambush had not just collapsed. It had been inverted, turned inside out, to become their prison. The air crackled with the ozone of their dawning horror. My family sat frozen, their faces a gallery of confusion and shock. My stepmother's hand had dropped from my shoulder, as if she'd been burned. Tate looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. I turned my head slowly away from the legal wreckage, and looked at my Aunt Karen. Her mouth was slightly agape, her eyes wide with fear and incomprehension. I gave her a small, tight smile. You really know how to throw a party, Auntie, I said, my voice dripping with ice. You've invited so many interesting guests. The arrival of Julian Croft and the utterance of the words litigation hold had sucked all the celebratory warmth from the room, leaving a vacuum of frigid legal reality. The carefully constructed stage had collapsed. And now the actors were scrambling in the ruins, their masks discarded, their true faces showing in the harsh, sudden light. The first to break was Evelyn. The soft, concerned stepmother persona vanished in an instant, replaced by something sharp and brittle. Her hand, which had been resting on my shoulder in a show of support, now pointed at me, her finger trembling with a rage born of pure terror. What have you done? She hissed. Her voice was a venomous whisper that carried across the silent room. I was only trying to help you. This was supposed to be a soft landing, a way to handle this with dignity. And you turn it into this circus. You are embarrassing this family. Sloane, there it was. The truth stripped of all its flowery sentiment. It was never about my well-being. It was about the family's image, about avoiding a messy public scandal. It was about dignity, their dignity, not mine. The years of her gentle admonitions to put family before career, to be softer, less ambitious, all resolved into this single, ugly moment. She wasn't trying to protect me. She was trying to manage me, to contain the potential damage I could do to the Mercer name. I looked at her, not with anger, but with a profound, weary clarity. The hurt I might have once felt had long ago calcified into something harder, something more useful. No, Evelyn, I said, my voice cutting through her rising hysteria. You weren't helping me. You were helping yourself. You chose reputation, not me. You have made your choice. Now live with it. My words hung in the air. A final, clean severance. Before she could retort, another voice, thin and reedy, piped up from near the wall. It was my cousin Tate. He was pale, sweating, and he couldn't look at me. He was speaking to the room, to anyone who would listen. A desperate plea for absolution. I didn't know it was going to be like this, he stammered, wringing his hands. The guy from Arclight, he stammered, wringing his hands. He said it was just to get everyone in the same room to talk. He said they wanted to make Sloane a generous offer. He took a shaky breath. They offered me a facilitator's fee, just to help the conversation go more smoothly. That's all it was. A fee for setting up a meeting, a facilitator's fee, a bribe sanitized with the language of his soulless profession. He had sold me out for a few thousand and a pat on the head from the competition, and he was trying to frame it as a networking expense. He was pathetic, the Judas of the family, counting his silver with trembling hands. Next came my Aunt Karen, her face a mess of streaming mascara and bewildered panic. She turned to me, her hands outstretched in a gesture of appeal. "Sloane, darling, I swear I had no idea," she sobbed. The perfect hostess whose party had been ruined by forces beyond her control. "That nice woman, Nora," she choked out. "She called me. She said the company wanted to throw you a surprise party to celebrate your new path, a career consultation. She said, a chance for you to get advice from senior people in a relaxed setting. I just wanted to do something nice for you." Her denial was so complete, so perfectly aligned with her lifelong obsession with appearances, that it was almost believable. She hadn't wanted to see the truth, because the lie was so much prettier. The lie came with a catered menu and a 3-tiered cake. The truth was a stack of legal documents and a room full of enemies. She had chosen the lie because it required less of her. The performance of their victimhood was almost touching, but the stage was still a crime scene, and I knew where the final piece of physical evidence was. I raised my voice slightly, cutting through Karen's sobs, and let my gaze drift toward the restaurant manager, who was hovering nervously by the door, drawn by the commotion. "Excuse me," I called out. "Could you tell me who arranged payment for this room tonight? Who signed the contract?" The manager, a man clearly out of his depth, flinched. He started, looking helplessly toward Lawrence Pike, holding a leather bill folder. Julian Croft, my lawyer, stepped in smoothly. "Under the terms of the litigation hold, you are required to produce that document," he said, his voice calm and absolute. Failure to do so could be seen as obstruction. Defeated, the manager walked forward and opened the folder on the table. There it was, a credit card receipt. He held it up for all to see. The signature was illegible, but the embossed name on the card was perfectly clear, Bluebridge Analytics, corporate account. The last shred of their narrative, the loving family-sponsored celebration, was incinerated by that piece of paper. This wasn't a family party hijacked by the company. This was a corporate action funded and executed by Bluebridge, with my family as the willing, complicit stage dressing. Calder had seen enough. He pushed his chair back, stood, and looked directly at one of the suited men from the back table, who was now trying to blend into the wallpaper. "Take the camera down," Calder said. It wasn't a request. It was a command. "This isn't a party anymore." As if that broke a spell, Nora Vale lunged for the documents on the table, the NDA, the confession, the separation agreement. Her instinct was to hide the evidence, but Julian Croft's hand shot out and clamped down on her wrist, stopping her cold. It wasn't a violent gesture, but it was unyielding. "Don't," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "Those documents are now subject to the litigation hold. They belong to us now." He gently but firmly pried her fingers open and slid the stack of papers into his own briefcase, snapping it shut with a sound that echoed like a cell door closing. I looked around the room. It was as if a spell had been broken. My family, who had seemed so large and imposing just 10 minutes ago, now looked small, pathetic. They were background characters. Their roles in the drama concluded. They huddled together, a tableau of whispered accusations and fearful glances, their relevance fading with every tick of the clock. They were no longer the jury judging me. They were just part of the wreckage, a faded, peeling backdrop on a stage that had been cleared for a much bigger fight. The air in the room was thick with the residue of collapsed lies. My family was a scattered, silent tableau of shame. Lawrence Pike and Nora Vale stood beside my lawyer, Julian Croft, like prisoners in a dock of their own making. The fight I had prepared for was over. But the sentencing was about to begin. It began, as so many corporate reckonings do, with the shrill, piercing shriek of a ringing phone. It was Nora's. She flinched as if she'd received an electric shock, her hand trembling as she pulled the device from her jacket pocket. She looked at the screen, and what little color was left in her face drained away completely, leaving a waxy, translucent pallor. She looked at Lawrence, her eyes wide with a new, more profound kind of terror. This was no longer about a lawsuit. This was about the collapse of her entire career. This was a call from above. She was about to answer it, to retreat into a corner for a whispered, desperate conversation. I wouldn't allow it. Put it on speaker, Nora, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried the absolute weight of command. I was no longer the employee being ambushed. I was the chief witness for the prosecution, and this was testimony. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing silently. Now, Julian Croft added, his voice a silken reinforcement of my own, with a shaking finger. Nora answered the call and pressed the small icon of a speaker. A man's voice, deep and resonant with the easy, unshakable authority of old money and absolute power, filled the room. It was a voice accustomed to being obeyed without question. Nora, this is Arthur Vance. A collective intake of breath. Arthur Vance, chairman of the board's audit committee, a man who operated so far above our level that his name was usually only invoked in hushed tones. Arthur, Nora began, her voice a ready mess. Be quiet, Vance commanded, not unkindly, but with the finality of a closing door. He paused. Sloane Mercer, are you in the room? I am, Mr. Vance, I replied, my voice clear and steady. There was another pause. The sound of a man processing complex information with terrifying speed. Our general counsel has just received a data packet from the firm of Ward and Gelder, Vance said, his tone as dry as old paper. It appears your mirror clause has been activated. The audit is now a board-level matter. Would you care to provide a brief, real-time summary of the situation that triggered this? He had given me the floor in front of my enemies, my family, and my lawyer. The chairman of the audit committee had handed me the microphone. I would not waste the opportunity. Certainly, Mr. Vance, I said, rising slowly from my chair. I looked directly at Lawrence Pike as I spoke. I am currently at an off-site non-comp event. Present are members of my family, Bluebridge CFO, and head of HR, and a notary public they hired. I was presented with a separation agreement, a non-compete, and a pre-written admission of policy violations. It was a clear attempt to coerce my signature, using corporate funds to stage the event for the express purpose of stripping my intellectual property rights to signal trace before the board meeting on Monday morning. Every word was a hammer blow, a cold, hard fact. I offered no emotion, no interpretation, just the anatomy of their crime, dissected and laid bare. Lawrence Pike finally exploded, his self-preservation instinct overriding his fear. That's a complete mischaracterization, Arthur, he blustered, stepping toward the phone on the table. With all due respect, this is a misunderstanding. This is a family party for Sloane, a birthday party. Nora and I were here as guests, as friends, to offer support during a difficult transition. Sloane is twisting this into something it's not. The lie was so bald, so pathetic that it was almost pitiable. The room was pregnant with the silence that followed, waiting to see if Vance would buy it. The voice from the phone was laced with a weary disappointment. A family party. Lawrence, Bluebridge corporate policy is to finance family birthday parties. Now, did you also hire the security? Nora, Can you confirm that Bluebridge paid for the room and the notary? The question was a scalpel. It cut directly to the evidence they couldn't deny. All eyes turned to Nora. She stood frozen, trapped in the spotlight of that simple question. A yes would be a confession. A no would be a lie that the receipt in the manager's hand would instantly expose, so she chose a third option. She said nothing. Her silence was a scream of guilt. Vance didn't need her to answer. I see, he said, the two words carrying a death sentence. I took out my own phone. My thumb moved quickly across the screen. My actions calm and deliberate. I attached a single file to an email addressed to Arthur Vance's personal account, an address I had obtained weeks ago. The file was named lp_signal_trace_approval_log.pdf. Mr. Vance, I said, interrupting the suffocating silence. Vance, I said, interrupting the suffocating silence. I have just sent you a file from my personal archives. It's a complete log of every major development milestone for Signal Trace, each one requiring and receiving explicit project approval via digital signature from Mr. Pike. His signature appears 47 times. He championed this project until the moment Archite made an offer. On the other end of the line, there was only the soft sound of a click, presumably Vance opening the file. The seconds stretched out, each one an eternity for Lawrence Pike, whose face was now the color of wet cement. When Arthur Vance spoke again, his voice was devoid of all previous patience. It was the voice of a man making a decision that would alter the course of a multi-million-dollar corporation. The verdict had been reached. The board's emergency session has been moved up. Effective immediately, all negotiations with ArcLight Metrics are suspended pending the results of this audit. A gasp went through the room. The deal was off. The prize they had been willing to destroy my career for was gone. Lawrence, Vance continued, his voice dropping another degree colder. You will surrender your laptop, your phone, and all company access cards to our head of security, who is already on his way to your home. You are suspended from all duties as Chief Financial Officer, effective immediately. Do you understand? There was no response from Lawrence. He seemed to have been hollowed out, a statue of a man whose entire world had just been vaporized by a voice on a telephone. The room was no longer silent. It felt as if all the air had been sucked out of it. A perfect, crushing vacuum where sound could not exist. The corporate execution was complete. The power had not just shifted. It had been completely and irrevocably reversed. In the ringing stillness, Calder leaned toward me. His presence a warm, solid anchor in the wreckage. He whispered, his voice a low rumble meant only for me. A final fitting epitaph for the night's events. Every birthday needs its candles blown out. Arthur Vance's final words hung in the vacuum his judgment had created. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, the sound rushed back into the room, but it wasn't conversation. It was a digital cacophony, a chorus of notifications. It started with a single chime from the back of the room, followed by another, and then another, a wave of identical tones washing over the party. It was the distinct sound of a Priority 1 internal company memo being pushed to every Bluebridge-issued device. On the table next to Lawrence Pike, his phone still on speaker, lit up. The banner notification was visible to everyone. The subject line was stark and brutal. My cousin Tate's phone buzzed violently against a water glass. The preview text glowed under the dim lights. I could read it upside down, effective immediately. An independent investigation has been launched regarding an alleged attempt to coerce a signature from an employee. The digital shockwave was immediate and devastating. It was no longer a private humiliation. It was now a public, company-wide event. The news was out. The audit was real. The setup had officially become a scandal. The first person to move was the notary. Throughout the entire drama, he had remained a silent, professional fixture, a piece of legal furniture. Now, he simply wanted to disappear. He began packing his briefcase with quiet, efficient movements. He nested his embossed seal into its velvet-lined case. He clicked his pens back into their holder. When he was done, he snapped the briefcase shut, the sound as final as a gavel. He paused, looked at me, and gave a short, formal bow of his head. "My apologies, Ms. Mercer," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I was hired under a false pretense. My services here were clearly misrepresented." He didn't wait for a response. He simply turned and walked out of the room. A man extricating himself from a disaster zone with as much dignity as he could muster. His departure seemed to break the paralysis that had gripped my family. Aunt Karen, her face a crumpled ruin, stumbled toward me. Her hands clasped as if in prayer. "Sloane, I am so sorry," she wept, the tears carving clean paths through her expensive foundation. "I never would have, if I had known." Her party. She was crying for me, but also for her ruined social event. The two tragedies inextricably linked in her mind. I said nothing. There was nothing to say. Her apology was for her own benefit, not mine. Evelyn, however, did not cry. She simply took one slow step backward, as if the ground in front of her had become unstable. Her hand reached out, not for me, but for the back of a nearby chair. Her knuckles white as she gripped the wood to keep her balance in that single, unguarded movement. I saw her for what she was, not a matriarch, not a strategist, but a brittle woman whose entire sense of order had just been shattered. The power dynamic she had relied on her entire life had just been inverted, and she couldn't find her footing. Across the room, Tate was a blur of frantic motion. His head was down, his thumbs flying across the screen of his phone. Delete. Delete. Delete, he muttered, trying to erase his digital trail, to wipe away the evidence of his facilitator's fee. It was a desperate, futile act. Julian Croft noticed it. Of course. He didn't even raise his voice. "Mr. Mercer," he said calmly, causing Tate to jump as if he'd been tasered. "I'd advise you to stop that. The litigation hold covers all personal devices used for company or related business. My team has already served your mobile carrier with a preservation order for all your messages. Every text you delete is just one more count of spoliation of evidence." Tate's hands froze over his phone. He looked up, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He was trapped. The digital walls were closing in on him just as surely as the physical ones had closed in on me an hour earlier. A quiet, awkward shuffling near the entrance drew my attention. Two of the restaurant staff had appeared. They avoided looking at anyone, their gazes fixed on a point on the wall. One of them produced a small stepladder. With a quiet rip of tape, they began to carefully detach the large celebratory banner from the wall. They folded it with ritualistic precision, the elegant cursive of New Beginnings, Sloane disappearing into a neat square of vinyl. They were dismantling the lie, piece by piece. I reached out and picked up my fountain pen from the gift table. The recording was complete. The memory card held a perfect, high-definition record of the entire ambush. From Nora's smiling threats to Lawrence's blustering denials, the evidence was superfluous now, an insurance policy I no longer needed. But it felt good to hold it. I capped it and slid it into my clutch. The action felt like the end of a chapter. Only Nora remained still. A statue carved from regret. She hadn't moved since Vance had hung up. She seemed to have aged a decade in the last 10 minutes. Finally, she turned her head and looked at me. The professional mask was gone. The condescension was gone. I was wrong, she said. Her voice was a dry rasp, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. It wasn't an apology. It was a simple statement of fact, a failed calculation, a strategic error of catastrophic proportions. I looked at her, at this woman who held the fates of hundreds of employees in her hands, who wielded policy and procedure like a weapon. I felt no pity, only a cold, surgical anger. You weren't just wrong, Nora, I said, my voice even and quiet, a final blade sliding between her ribs. You were a coward. You chose to make someone else sign your name to your own responsibilities. My words to Nora hung in the dead air. A final, cold assessment of her character. The fallout was no longer my concern. My objective had been achieved. The threat neutralized. Now all that was left was the extraction. I turned my back on the corporate wreckage of Nora and Lawrence and faced the emotional wreckage of my family. They were clustered together near the wall, a small, frightened herd. Evelyn was staring at her hands. Tate was looking at the floor. My Aunt Karen was still dabbing at her eyes with a ruined cocktail napkin. They looked like strangers to me now, their familiar faces twisted by the ugly truth of their complicity. They were waiting for something, a final confrontation, a shouting match, perhaps even a reconciliation. I would give them none of it. I would give them only the truth. From this moment on, I said, and my voice was not the voice of their niece or their stepdaughter, but of a woman they no longer knew, my signature will only ever appear on things that I have chosen. My name will only be attached to promises I have made. You will not use it. You will not leverage it. And you will not offer it on my behalf ever again. We are finished. There was no room for negotiation in my tone. It was a declaration of independence, a final closing of a long and painful account. As if to punctuate my statement, a soft, heavy thud came from behind me. It was the sound of something solid hitting the thick carpet. Lawrence Pike's phone had slipped from his nerveless grasp. It landed face up, the screen glowing with the final, damning evidence of his downfall. In the harsh glare of the notification light, an email preview was starkly visible to anyone who cared to look. The subject line read, "Immediate," and the sender was Arthur Vance. The first line of the email was all that was needed, further to our conversation. This email serves as official notice of your temporary suspension. The last lingering strand of authority he possessed had been severed. Nora's phone, still on the table, still connected to the speaker, crackled to life one last time. Arthur Vance's voice was the sound of the new reality, a disembodied command from the pinnacle of the company. "Sloan," he said, his tone all business now. "My office tomorrow morning, 9 a.m. sharp. We will convene an executive session of the board. You will be the only other person in attendance. Be prepared." The line went dead. The finality of it was absolute. Alone. I would not be coming as an employee to be questioned. I would be coming as a key principal, a power broker in my own right. The board wasn't just investigating a crime. They were meeting with the person who now held all the cards. I felt a warm, strong hand close over mine colder. He had risen from his chair and was standing beside me, a silent, solid presence. I threaded my fingers through his. The simple contact, a profound comfort. He looked down at me, and in his eyes I saw not pity, but a deep, quiet pride. "Birthday's over," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble. I squeezed his hand. It was time to go. We turned and walked toward the door. Our steps synchronized. We didn't hurry. There was no need to run. We moved with the calm deliberation of people who had already won. The path to the exit took us directly past the cake. It sat on its pedestal, a three-tiered monument to a lie. The vanilla buttercream was pristine. The sugar flowers perfect. The candles, still in their box, were unlit. No one had sung. No one had made a wish. It was a beautiful, expensive, meaningless object. I didn't give it a second glance. As Calder opened the door, the night rushed in to greet us. A cool, clean wind, smelling of salt and the vast, dark expanse of the sea, swept into the stuffy room. It felt like a cleansing breath. The sudden draft caused the delicate, flame-shaped bulbs of the nautical lamps to flicker wildly. One near the door went out with a soft pop, then another. The warm, artificial glow of the trap was dying. We stepped out into the night, leaving the wreckage behind us. We didn't look back. The last thing I saw in my mind's eye was the image of the room we had just left, the small, broken figures of my family, the two disgraced executives standing in the dimming light. And on the table, the central, damning piece of evidence, the stack of crisp white papers, their signature lines stark, empty, and powerless. The story ends here. The story ends here.